onto your butt.
Da-da-da. Oh, hello. Welcome to episode 161 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. As usual, I am joined by Mary, a woman who has certainly climbed up a mountain both ways in the snow for a cold Labatt's Blue. I am merely a floating piece of ice named Darren. How we doing, Mary? How we doing?
Well, it was for Molson Canadian, but
Well, we're changing up a little bit. It's a new year. New year, new beer, Mary. Yeah. That's the way it's going to be.
So I'll switch to Molson Canadian,
No,
except I can't get it here.
You can't. So what's going on? How are you?
Not much. It's been a few weeks since we recorded. Is this our first episode of 2026?
I don't know. Probably.
I think it is.
I think it might be.
Yep.
But that's okay. But it's a 161st episode. That's the big number.
Yep.
So I'm going to be, hold on. Don't get ahead of things. I'm going to ask you, what are you drinking tonight?
I am drinking Hopsecutioner IPA by Terrapin, which is a brewery out of, I believe it's Athens, Georgia. And I'm drinking it out of my General Lew Wallace Study and Museum, which is located in Crawfordsville, Indiana. That mug. And the mug says, "Been her, done that."
Oh.
And that was given to us by our friend Olivia. So thank you very much for that.
Very witty. Very witty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what are you drinking?
Oh, thank you. I'm drinking, it's called I Love the Drake by Stellwagen, and it's from Massachusetts. Of course, it's from the great Drake May, who's got a big football game this weekend, and I am drinking it out of my Abraham Lincoln mug, which has nothing to do with anything with this episode, except that he was a president during the Civil War. So that's my thing. That's my story. That's what I'm going on. So what were you going to say before?
I was going to say that, so this, it's not even really a battle. It's a raid that we're talking about. The anniversary of it was also 161 years ago.
We're going to talk about another somewhat obscure battle, and it is a battle that took place late in the war in snowy and cold Beverly, West Virginia, primarily, again, due to the need for supplies. And before we get started, let's jump ahead a little bit, so we're going to slow this roll a little bit, to understand why a small group of men would subject themselves to what was a more miserable night than a cold January in Buffalo. It's important to turn back time.
If I could turn back.
And remember how and why they got there. So again, for most of the American Civil War, the Confederate Army, as well as the Union, for the most part, were heavily focused on gaining supplies. Now, much of the Army of Northern Virginia, Commander Robert E. Lee's, his mindset in attacking the North in 1862 and again in 1863 were focused on getting food and supplies for his always hungry army. The rebels, they fought tooth and nail to hold that Shenandoah Valley, because due to that Union blockade, the loss of the valley would likely spell doom. And the Confederates in the East, that was their breadbasket, right? Going back to 1863 now, the Confederates in the East focused on improving their supply lines. They replaced a quartermaster general, his name was Abraham Myers, with a brigadier general, Alexander Lawton, who Antietam people will know. He commanded Richard Ewell's division at the cornfield back in September of 62. But this turned into an endless challenge. Ulysses S. Grant's five-pronged, attack strategy in 1864 tightened, the noose around the Rebs, but by the end of 64, the Confederates found it harder and harder to get and distribute supplies after Lee was pushed back to Petersburg and Grant's siege took its toll. With an urgent and growing need for, clothes and weapons, ho-hos.
DQ cars.
Horses, all of it. Lee's army was desperate and needed a plan to gain anything they could get their hands on heading into January of 1865. Now, with limited options to get supplies and foraging limited in that time of year, it became necessary to find a way to get them from the Union Army in their winter camps and enter an ultra-aggressive cavalry commander from Campbell County, Virginia, named Thomas L. Rosser.
Yep. His nickname was Tex because he does move to Panola County, Texas when he's 13 years old. But he was born on October 15th, 1836 to John and Martha Melvina Rosser. And in 1849, as I said, he's 13 years old. His family is going to move to a 640-acre farm in Panola County, Texas. His father actually remained in Virginia for a period of time to settle up business there. So it was young Thomas who had to lead the wagon train there, his family, on this journey. In 1856, Texas Congressman Lemuel D. Evans appointed Rosser to West Point. Rosser, however, did not complete his studies there because he resigned when Texas left the Union on April 22nd, 1861. This is just 2 weeks before he was supposed to graduate. So that should tell you how into the secession thing he was. Mm-hmm. Now, funny story, a good friend of Rosser at West Point had been none other than George Armstrong Custer, who, as we all know, is going to fight for the Union. Their friendship would continue during and after the war, and I actually have like one funny story about.
Yeah,
them
they got some funny stories. He's actually like his roommate, I believe.
Yeah,
I
think they were roommates. And then so Rosser travels to Montgomery, Alabama, to enlist in the Confederate Army. He was commissioned as a first lieutenant, and he became an instructor of the Washington Artillery of New Orleans in New Orleans. At the Battle of First Manassas in July of 1861, Rosser would command the 2nd Company of the Washington Artillery. He actually shot down one of General McClellan's observation balloons, which earned him a promotion to captain. And he's also going to command the Washington Artillery during the 7 days battles of the Peninsula Campaign. Rosser is severely wounded at Mechanicsville and he ends up being promoted to Lieutenant Colonel of Artillery. A few days after this, he was made Colonel of the 5th Virginia Cavalry. On Jeb Stuart's expedition to Catlet Station, Rosser commanded the advance of the cavalry there. And at 2nd Manassas, it is Rosser who captures Union General John Pope's orderly and horses. Rosser's cavalry will also delay the advance of Union General William B. Franklin's advance of the 6th Corps?
6th Corps.
6th Corps, good. And he's also going to screen General Lee's left flank at Antietam. He also assumed temporary command against Union General Alfred Pleasanton, most punchable face in the Civil War, I just want to add. Rosser's going to be badly wounded at the Battle of Kelly's Ford on March 17, 1863, and he would be out recovering until near the beginning of the Gettysburg Campaign. And here he would command his regiment in the fighting at at East Cavalry Field, and he was promoted to Brigadier General of the Laurel Brigade, which had basically made its mark under the famous Turner Ashby.
The Laurel Brigade, that was part of 7th Virginia Cav, along with Robert Shoe's battery. That was big time. So yeah, Turner Ashby gets killed at the Good Farm.
Yep.
In Harrisonburg, Virginia, on June 6th of 1862.
Yep.
So he's going to get to become a good brigadier general of that famous brigade, which is really going to make a name for himself at that point.
Yeah. And then during the 1864 Overland Campaign, Rosser drove back a large force of Union cavalry and artillery at the Battle of the Wilderness. At Trevelyan Station, Rosser's wounded again, but his brigade did capture a number of prisoners who were part of the men Custer was leading at the time. In the Shenandoah Valley, he fights against Sheridan, and he commands Fitzhugh Lee's division at the Battle of Cedar Creek. At the Battle of Tom's Creek, Rosser ends up getting routed by Custer's men. Custer chases him for over 10 miles, and this is going to be known as the Woodstock Races, and it had no point other than that Custer is chasing Rosser around, so they're acting like college boys again. Custer also captured Rosser's private wardrobe wagon at Tom's Brook, and Rosser sent him a message immediately. He refers to Custer as Fanny. So he says to him, "Dear Fanny, you may have had me take a few steps back today, but I will be even with you tomorrow. Please accept my good wishes in this little gift, a pair of your drawers captured at Trevelyan Station, signed Tex." Custer wrote back, "Dear friend, thanks for setting me up in so many new things, but would you direct your tailor to make the coattails of your next uniform a trifle shorter? Best regards, GAC." In the Southern press, Rosser became known as the savior of the Valley, and he ends up being promoted to Major General in November of 1864. And this is where we will begin into Rosser's raid, which is a few months later in 1865.
Yeah, 1865, and again, this is with the Confederates, and again, the desperate need of supplies, and he's aggressive. Thomas Rosser, he's an aggressive guy.
Well, the number of times he's been wounded.
He's been wounded, but he's very underrated in the big picture with a lot of these things. For a guy who was everywhere, you think that people would know more about Thomas Rosser, but he's aggressive. But early of January of 1865, he will come up with a plan to get supplies. Now, again, Rosser's division is encamped 12 miles west of Stanton, Virginia, in a place called Swope's Tavern, and he'll get wind of a Union camp 70 miles northwest near the town of Beverly, West Virginia in Randolph County, near the Tygart Valley River. Now, it was guarded by just like 1,000 guys from the 34th Ohio and 8th Ohio Cavalry under the command of a guy named Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ewart. Now, the challenge, we've talked before about terrain and weather and that in plans. This has kind of got all three of them, right? Really. The challenge here is going to be the terrain, and it meant going through the Allegheny Mountains, climbing Cheat Mountain, and crossing the Tygart Valley River in January. Despite the terrain and the weather, Rosser very, very much wanted to raid the Union camp at Beverly, And he wanted to get those supplies very, very badly. He's going to approach his commander, Major General Fitzhugh Lee, who was in charge while Jubal Early was banished to the valley. He was sent to the cornfield. And so he's going to make his case to Fitzhugh Lee. Listen, we need supplies. It's only 70 miles away. I can do it. Fitzhugh Lee is going to basically approve Rosser's plan. Mm-hmm. But before long, he's going to start to get it together. Now, this was an audacious, it's a big word there, Mary, a plan. Not everyone supported it.
No.
One of his subordinates, Colonel Thomas Munford, told Rosser, hey, listen, let's postpone this raid. The weather sucks. It's just, it makes no sense. Rosser looks at him and instantly arrests him for dereliction of duty.
Can you imagine? You're trying to be the voice of reason here.
Yeah.
And you're like, you know what? Like, I think we need to slow our roll on this. I think the weather might get bad. Like, it's not a good time of year. Blah blah blah. And Rosser's like, you, my good friend, are under arrest.
Well, he was headstrong and he was hell bent to do it. Right. Rosser did have a problem, though, Mary. He's always a problem.
Yep.
Right. There is. Due to a lack of food and forage, he could only muster 300 serviceable horses for this raid, which meant he was limited to 300 guys for the most part. He will gather his best 300 from William Morgan's 1st Virginia Cavalry, as well as guys from Albert Cook's 8th Virginia Cavalry, as well as some others, including the 6th Virginia Cavalry. Mm-hmm. But he's going to make his final plans to move on Beverly. January 7th, 1865, it's pouring out. It's miserable weather. The roads are pure mud. The streams in the area, you can imagine they're overflowing. And it all froze over when a cold snap hit.
And as I was reading about this, and I think our listeners will probably end up, whether they agree with us or not, but I think like overall, once you hear this whole story, this whole thing, this Rosser's raid, the journey there and the journey back, I think is worse than the Mud March. And I thought the Mud March was bad, but this is probably
worse.
Like thunder, lightning, hail, clowns, everything.
2 days later, on January 9th, Rosser and his men, they're going to leave their camp and they're going to move down the Stanton-Petersburg Turnpike through the Buffalo Gap. Now, there was snow on the ground, but the weather was, for the most part, was kind of mild and it was comfortable during the day. But everything changed when night fell, when torrential rain began to fall. Now, what's interesting in this raid is because Thomas Rosser, he never really submitted a detailed after-action report for this. Most of the details about this raid come from a guy named Cornelius B. Height of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, as well as letters by a guy named George Washington Estes Rowe of the 9th Virginia Cavalry, which he wrote to his sister. So basically, he was obviously friendly with a lot of these guys because a lot of the stories are similar, but there was nothing really from Rosser. After marching through 25-foot snowdrifts, Rosser is going to arrive at the Greenbrier River, where chunks of floating ice are being carried by a strong overflowing current, which is going to hit their guys. I mean, just picture this. Horses and men are slipping on the ice. It was frozen solid in some spots. They had to reluctantly jump into the frozen river to get across the western side. They had one horse died of exposure because of the cold.
And the other thing, too, is because there's so much because there's so much ice and frozen water to drink is difficult to find for the men and the horses.
Right.
So that is going to be another issue as well.
And these guys, they didn't have tents. They didn't have shelter. They'd already climbed 7 miles through the Allegheny Mountains in this worst weather imaginable. Major Daniel Grimley, who may not have been on Saturday Night Live back in the day, right? but he's now part of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, and he's angry, and he's pissed, and he writes of this, quote, "The weather moderated very much, and before we reached the summit, it began to rain all night long. We were not allowed to build fires, so all night we stood in a pelting rain until it seemed to penetrate the very marrow of our bones." He went on, "The soldiers fretting, fuming, quarreling, and damning everything in general upon the face of the earth, and especially the man who suggested this expedition in particular." Of course, Thomas Rosser.
So he's kind of like a pox on Thomas Rosser.
He was. By January 10th, Rosser's men had arrived, and they began to climb Cheat Mountain. Now, this is the site of the battle that took place a couple of years before, but they're going to arrive at its summit probably around noontime on the 10th. And again, this is when a violent storm is going to hit again. Rosser's men, they're subjected to, like you said earlier, vivid lightning, thunder, pounding hail, to the point where the horses were too scared to even move. They stood there in pure fright of this weather.
One guy described it. He said it was the most vivid lightning, terrible pearls of thunder, and a terrific hailstorm. We seemed to be in the very midst of the clouds, and the lightning and thunder was near us, at us, and all around us. Our overcoats and clothing, wet from rain and snow, became as hard as boards. And then the rain changes to snow, and the soldier who's writing this says it made us look ghost-like in the dark.
It's amazing. I mean, it was close to 0 degrees. Just imagine, when you get your coats all wet and everything's just stiff as a board.
Yeah.
They said the rain changed to snow, and they said it made us look like ghosts in the dark. There was a historian named Michael Musick, and he was a historian of the 6th Virginia, and he wrote of this moment, just like you said. But he mentioned, too, the men were so stiff with the cold, they had to be taken from their horses, their pistols removed from their holsters, and placed in the cock drawn in their hands, like robots.
This is just, it's more miserable than the Mud March. Like, listen to our episode about the Mud March and then listen to this and tell me which one is more miserable.
This weather was so bad, it's likely TV4's Shelby Scott was there to report on it. That's how bad, you'd be cool if you know who she was, right?
Vaguely.
But Rosser had to climb down Cheat Mountain slowly, and they didn't arrive at the foot of the mountain until after dark now. But their troubles weren't over yet, because once they arrived, they realized that they had to cross the Cheat River, which was also frozen, and it was difficult to cross. Now, they did get across it, but when they crossed the river, the men basically had to move north through the night towards the town of Beverly on the east side of the Tiger Valley.
They stopped briefly for a rest in what's called Devil's Hollow. Can you imagine? It's like, okay, we've done all this shit. All right, now we're going to rest in Devil's Hollow.
Yeah, this is bad juju written all over this one, But they're walking, and this wind is blowing in their face, sub-zero. Cornelius Height, the guy from the 6th Virginia, he wrote about it. Our direction was north, right into the face of the wind. I thought I would perish from the cold. Now, they still had to deal with the Tigard Valley River, which snaked around the town, so it would require more than one crossing to get there. It just kind of moved around.
Yep.
Rosser did have somewhat of an ace in the hole with this, though. He had some guides with him from nearby Randolph County, which is where Beverly is. And they're able to show him the location of a rough path that his men could take to avoid having to cross and recross that Tigar River. It was longer, but you don't got to cross the river 5 times.
But this is like the lesser of two evils kind of situation because, as you said, it's a blind, rough mountain path. It's going to eliminate the crossing of the river, take them longer. But Rosser is going to end up choosing that.
Yeah, it's the obvious choice. When they ended up doing it and making an all-night flanking march in the snow, uphill both ways, like my mother used to say, right? In sub-zero temperatures that only Bruce Schwegler knows the wind chill factor at that point. Rosser's men arrived in Beverly, West Virginia, at around 4 o'clock in the morning on January 11th, just north of the town along the Philippi Pike. Now, across the way stood the Union camp, which was the winter quarters for the troops from the 8th Ohio Cavalry, as well as the infantry from the 34th Ohio, like I said before, under Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hewart. Now, the story of Union troops is equally as fascinating as Rosser's journey through the snow. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the weather was just as awful for the Union guys, and they were encamped in log huts for the winter. They were in their winter quarters. The Union commander, Ewart, was very popular with the Southern sympathizers because he was reportedly very kind to them. Mm-hmm. Now, Robert Ewart is not a household name in the Civil War world.
I could not find very much about him at all.
No, it's not thought. He's from Troy, Ohio, and he's a member of the 44th OVI, which is the Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He gets promoted to captain just before the regiment changed to the 8th OVI, where he was named lieutenant colonel. Now, he had a really outgoing personality. He was one of those guys you meet and just automatically like, kind of like me, if you think about it, right? but during his time in Beverly, he made sure to take care of all the locals, including Southern sympathizers. He went out of his way to basically ensure none of his men even looked at them cross-eyed.
No.
And before we get to the story here, it's important. It's kind of fun to jump ahead a little bit and tell his post-war story because we'll just forget about it because it shows the type of guy he was. After the war, Ewart, he returns home to Troy. He survives, so spoiler alert, okay?
Yeah.
He basically starts kind of a Habitats for Humanity type group where he's going to buy land and build homes at a cheap price to house poor people in Troy. Part of that town was known as Ewart Town, where many of his houses were built. He was just a humanitarian. He moves to the town of New Straitsville, where he worked in a nearby coal mine in Hocking Valley, which is a prototypical coal mining town. Now, Ewart is going to end up developing what we know today as black lung. And eventually he'll end up with tuberculosis, which he suffered during the last years of his life. Just before he died, he bought more land to build more subsidized housing. And in 1876, consumption is going to kill him, and those houses never get built. That coal mine in New Straitsville, it ends up closing in 1884 due to a labor dispute. To get revenge, you know what the miners do? They send a burning coal car into the mine to light it up, to catch it on fire, which it does.
Oh, my God.
The fire was so hot, the local wells contained hot water, and people could make coffee without having to boil water. That's how hot it was.
Oh, my God.
Here's the crazy thing. The fire in New Straitsville mine still burns today.
Really?
142 years later, it's still burning. So revenge was had by those disgruntled miners.
Holy shit.
So it's a lot of coal apparently left behind. But anyway, back to 1865, where that storm that struck Rosser's men also caused misery for Ewart's men in Beverly. This weather was so bad, some of the local citizens in Beverly, they go to Ewart and they are worried about the welfare of the Union soldiers, many of whom had to stand outside on guard duty in this blizzard. And by all accounts, they had true sympathy for these boys, and they begged the Union brass to allow them to go inside to ride out the storm, assuring them that there is no possible way Confederates could possibly make it over Cheat Mountain in this storm.
I also read that there had been a party, too.
There is.
And that's why some of them...
Well, that's the thing. Ewart is going to agree with the locals. He's going to relieve the camp and let them stay in their cabins, leaving just 3 sentries, 1 man on the Philippi Road, 1 man on the Huttonville Road, and a 3rd man in the back near a ravine at the back of the camp. Here's where the party comes in. The locals also invited the officers to attend a party that night in the town at the Leonard Hotel, owned by a local woman named Lucinda Leonard. After the party, if they wanted to, they could stay in private homes or at the Leonard Hotel for the night instead of having to go back to camp if they wanted to. Ewart and the officers took them up on this offer, and they went to the ball in town at the Leonard, leaving the rank and file back in their cabins, guarded by just 3 sentries, all hundreds of yards apart from each other in the dark and in the snow. Now, there'll be forever speculation about whether these locals set Ewart's men up, if they basically did. But it's kind of impossible because, for one, they were right. It was seemingly impossible Confederates could go through the Cheat Mountain at that storm to attack. And they did like the men. There's also no possible way they could have known Rosser was coming. Even Miss Cleo couldn't have possibly known Rosser was coming. So that's what happens. But anyway, like I was saying earlier, Rosser arrives in Beverly at around 4 o'clock in the morning while Union troops were sleeping and the officers, for the most part, were still at the party in town. Now, one of Rosser's local aides, the one who showed him that path around that Tygar River, was a man named Archibald Earl. And he took Rosser to his home, which is just south of town, where 2 of his friends were staying. Archibald Earl just happens to be the brother of who? Lucinda Leonard, the hotel owner. And she told one of Earl's friends previously that staying in the house that the officers were at a party and away from camp. They told Rosser this piece of intel, and the Rebs now saw a golden opportunity to attack right in their faces.
We may have an opportunity here.
So he will prepare to attack the camp in just a couple hours later, shortly before dawn. And like I said before, there's all kinds of speculation about whether or not this whole thing was a big setup. I don't think it was. I think it was a very, very fortunate situation for Rosser.
Yeah.
Right? One of the Union troops who was left back in camp was a German sutler named George Frankenberg, and they was loved by the troops. At the Battle of Lewisburg, was the previous May in Greenbrier County in West Virginia, The army under General George Crook was severely outnumbered by Henry Heath's army. Frankenberg is a sutler. He's not a soldier. He sees they're outnumbered. He goes into his shop. He grabs a corporal jacket out of the store as well as a rifle, and he's going to join the fight with the men. The men will call him Corporal from then on, from the rest of his life. That's going to be his nickname. Not Major, Corporal, right? Frankenberg was extremely trusted by his men, so much so that he was trusted to carry the soldiers' cash back to Springfield, Ohio, to deliver to their families. The Ohio troops had just got paid, and Frankenberg had a satchel of $10,000 in cash that the men gave him to bring back to their families, which is what they did. That'd be $200,000 in cash today, okay? The night of January 10th, Frankenberg is going to go to sleep literally with that satchel containing 10 grand in cash as his pillow. That's what he's going to do.
Oh, my God.
The three sentinels still spending the night in the cold all bundled up. They're trying to stay warm. They're all by themselves staring off into the darkness waiting for the sun to rise. And they're not with each other. They're all separated. Just before dawn, one of the sentries, the one positioned near the ravine, he will see two men wearing blue approaching him, crunching his way through the snow. The sentry is going to assume that these are men coming to relieve him. And he's going to yell, "Who goes there?" Which, of course, the men respond, "Friends."
Howdy, friend.
Howdy, friends. When they arrived, they pulled guns on him and took the sentry prisoner, which to his pure astonishment. The two Rebs made a signal. Don't know what the signal was, but they made a signal, and immediately through the ravine came rushing the rest of Rosser's men towards the sleeping camp.
And nobody had heard anything. Now, mind you, they've only got 3 sentries, so they're not going to hear anything. But apparently Rosser's army are described as looking like a spectral army as they advance once the order was given. And the snow muffled their footsteps, and their overcoats were stiff with ice. So you can just imagine how they would have looked walking towards.
Especially you're dead asleep. I mean,
yeah.
Rosser's men split up to visit all the huts to take the Union troops prisoner before they could exit their tents. Some of the Union guys were shot as they exited the cabins. Some are shot in their beds. But for the most part, most surrendered without firing a shot. One of the Ohio soldiers, he wrote, quote, "In a few minutes, quite an army marched down the ravine to the camp, demanding the inmates to surrender, and if they did not immediately comply, they would come out shooting." And he continued, "A few of the boys got up with their arms and fired a few shots back, but there was much danger of shooting our own men as the enemy. The enemy had the advantage, and there was no chance to rally or to do anything but surrender or run if there was a chance. The bridge across the river was not far away, and such as could broke for it." One of the men who broke for it was who? George Frankenberg with his cash. He miraculously gets away with all that money, and he escaped completely unbeknownst to the Rebs, who missed out on what would have been a gigantic payday. He got away. Others were not as lucky and were shot during the escape. Captain Cornelius Height again, from the 6th Virginia Cavalry, he writes, I counted 5 dead, 5 dead soldiers lying in the street, extending north of the Presbyterian Church to the location of the Wilbur's starter's residence. So you can see how it was going on with this. The entire raid lasts less than 30 minutes, with the Rebs losing just one man who was killed when he entered a cabin. He got shot in the chest,
and one guy was wounded.
It was 2 guys. There was one captured, one missing. So probably 2 wounded. The Feds lose 25 guys. They got 580 captured, including Lieutenant Colonel Robert Ewart, who had returned to camp after the party just before Rosser's men struck, as well as Lieutenant Colonel Luther Fernie of the 34th Ohio. So regarding the purpose of the raid, the supplies, Rosser bagged 100 horses, 600 rifles, 10,000 food rations, which had to include DQ gift cards.
Yep.
Especially in winter time, no one's using it, right? It was a hammer versus nail victory for Rosser. But little did he know, though, his story was not over. And they still had to get home. They still had to climb back through the snowy mountains to get back to camp near Stanton.
Yep. And as they leave Beverly, the temperature begins to fall again. And now at this point, some of the troops and officers are drunk
Well,
Add to the fun.
some of the supplies they got whiskey.
Yep.
And the men drank liberally. They got to a call me maybe level drunk situation during this. I mean, you can't blame them. This 75-mile march back to Stanton. It's cold. You have no tents. You have no supplies.
Yep.
Everything's cold. And you got whiskey. What do you think you're going to do? I know what you would do. Yep. But aside from their supplies, they also had to deal with these 580 Union prisoners. Again, these guys had no blankets. They were frostbitten. You can only imagine, right?
Some of them just walked away. They're like, I'm going to go now.
Well,
and
that's
they
what
just
happened.
walked away.
Many of the escapees, I mean, the Rebs they had to worry about themselves. I mean, you know, it's like walking in a blizzard.
Yep.
And a lot of the Union guys just walked away. And if they were even noticed, who the hell knows? Two of the captives who escaped were the two biggest fish of all. Colonel Ewart and Lieutenant Colonel Forney. They just walked away back to the Union lines. Some say it was because of how well Ewart treated the Southern sympathizers. He was basically allowed to escape. Some believe that he had the assistance of a couple of Confederates in Rosser's army from Randolph County who wanted to take care of him, but taking care of their family and friends. But his problems were just beginning as well.
Yes.
He's going to return, and he's going to get blamed for the raid. He'll get called out by George Crook, who wrote, quote, "The disaster was the result of laxity of discipline, carelessness, and insufficiency of guard." Sounds like your report card in 11th grade.
It was. But, you know, in Ewart says that they thought it was impossible for the enemy to attack at that time of year, given how severe the weather was and how high the water was in the river. So they're not expecting anything. Like, why would you? And I don't blame him. And he also described them as being got completely off guard and that there was no time to even rally one company together.
Yeah, it doesn't speak well for him, though. I mean,
No.
it's probably more reality that he never thought in a million years.
Yeah.
You're in winter quarters, it's snowing out. But either way, Crook wasn't having it. He recommended that Ewart get dismissed from the Army for, quote, "disgraceful neglect of command and for permitting themselves to be surprised and the greatest portion of their command captured and ordered that worthy officers may have filled their places, which they have proved themselves incompetent to hold." Oof.
Yeah.
Tough one. On January 18th, 1865, Rosser and his men, they're going to get back to their headquarters at Swope's Depot near Stanton. And the men are frostbitten. They're miserable. Their horses on the verge of collapsing. I mean, it's easy to picture in your head how this whole thing went on. Major Grimley, SNL alum we talked about. He, who earlier complained about the march to Beverly, he wrote of the march back to Swope's Depot. He said, quote, "I witnessed suffering during the war in all forms, but never was so acute, so intense, and so universal as that which we endured by Confederate soldiers and federal prisoners on that occasion." Private William Wilson, oh, I can't say that, quote, "I felt like an Arctic explorer returning from a trip to the North Pole." And then the best of all was George Washington Estes Rowe. He's from Spotsylvania County, and he's a member of the 6th Virginia Cavalry, the Orange Raiders, right? He is livid witnessing the condition of the men when they return to camp. He said in a letter to his sister Nan, quote, "A great many of my company were frosted on this Beverly raid of Rosser's, among them Elanhan Sisson," who I looked in, it's his cousin, I found he's his cousin. "Rosser has ruined our brigade. We have not 100 men in our regiment. The times are hard. The boys can't buy anything for the horses and are actually starving to death." Rowe would later join Rosser in the breakout at the Union encirclement at Appomattox, of all things. Despite Rowe's disdain for Rosser, who was hated by many of his men during the Beverly raid, Rowe's oldest son, Absalom, who they called Abby, he will marry Rosser's cousin, Annie Juliet Rosser, in July of 1893 after Rowe had died. I wonder if they did the chickenettes that wedding, right? But, you know, in the end of this, Rosser's raid was a success, but considering they really didn't get as many supplies as they thought they were going to, it becomes a minor mention in the overall history of the war. But the reality, though, is this raid, it has to rank, like you said, with the Mud March, is one of the most grueling tests of physical endurance by either army during the war, but it gets little mention.
Yeah, like nobody talks about it. Like, admittedly, I had not studied it much at all. I mean, I'd heard about it, knew a little bit about it, but not. Now I know a lot more about it, having studied it for this episode, and it's a fascinating one to study. It's really interesting, not just for kind of the politics that play into it after with what happens to you, Art, the Union general or the Union guy there. But just to see how like tunnel vision Rosser gets with this, that he has to do it to the point where when someone is like, you know what, it might not be a good idea because it's January and the weather could be bad and it's cold up in the mountains, and he arrests the guy for saying that. So and I mean, I guess it was worthwhile because he got supplies.
Well, again,
but
you got to remember that the mindset at the time, Fort Fisher in Wilmington, North Carolina, falling a month or so later, it shines a moral light on the need for supplies, and it continued right up until the end of the war.
Well, and the other thing too is you have less supplies coming from kind of from Georgia. Mm-hmm. Because of what Sherman has done on his march to the sea, and now he's going to begin his Carolinas campaign. Again, more railways are going to get ripped up. You're going to have a less of a chance of getting supplies to Lee's Army of Northern Virginia.
All the things that Grant was doing at that point, even Red River, everything, Overland Campaign, the Valley, with Sheridan, it's all designed to tighten the noose on the Confederates and cut their supplies down. And by the end of 64, early 65, it became an existential issue to survival. Again, when you look at after Wilmington falls specifically, and most of the ports are shut down, it just goes to show that Thomas Rosser's raid, it just, again, accentuates the hopelessness of Lee's army just trying to feed their men and horses for just another day. And although a lot of the men in Rosser's brigade and the men he specifically took on this raid, they hated him for it. And at the end of the day, they probably never forgave him.
I don't blame them. Like, Rosser is this guy who, and I mean, I've got a quote I'm going to read in a few minutes once I talk about the kind of his after the war, but he is just this, like, I don't know. I'm reading about him and researching. I'm like, this guy's a dick. He's an asshole.
Well, you know what? Maybe so. But again, the thing about Rosser though is that he's aggressive.
Yes,
and he's not the type of guy who's going to run into traffic either. He thinks these things out. You're sitting there at Swope's depot at camp, and you're thinking, okay, there's Union troops just 75 miles away. There's not going to be expecting anything. They had no choice to get food from that point. You're not going to go to the locals anymore. There's nothing to be had. You had to raid the people who had the food, and who had the food was the Union Army. I mean, you want to look at Robert Ewart. He's in a tough spot because he's a complete footnote in American history. No one's heard of Robert Ewart. I get that. But he was put in a situation which is very, very difficult too. He must have felt like the safest guy in the world because everything was going on in the Valley. It's going on in Petersburg. He's set up in that area in West Virginia, in Beverly, and no one's coming to get him. He probably had the best job in the world, but it goes to show you get a little bit too lax.
Yeah.
And whether or not the locals set him up with this, which I don't think they did, I think it was an unfortunate circumstance. But you have to always stay in readiness because you never know, because this is what happens.
Yep.
Rosser took advantage of really Ewart having his pants down and bagged him. But he didn't get the $10,000 in cash. He got a lot of the supplies, but there was not a lot of supplies to be had. Considering what they got, 10,000 food rations is all they got.
Yep.
It's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of ho-hos.
Yep.
But it's not enough to sustain an army.
No.
And I think they thought when they got there, like, this is it. Well, let's get what we can get.
Yeah, that's probably what they thought. It was like, oh, geez.
And you can sit down. You can see some of these guys we talked about, Estes Rowe and Height and those guys thinking, we did all of this to get this.
Yep, crossing over mountains.
You better damn believe we're drinking whiskey on the way back.
Oh,
there is going to be beer in the car on this ride home, Dad. Okay, because I'm not. This was horrible, and that's what happens. And a lot of the guys never forgave him for it. And Rosser was a fascinating fella, and I know and his story goes right to post-war.
It goes, and so Rosser is gonna command a cavalry division during the siege of Petersburg in the spring, and he's gonna fight near Five Forks. Now, one thing about Rosser, he is one of the hosts. In fact, he is the host of the shad bake that happens. That Pickett is like, oh, shad. Mm-hmm. I don't need to watch my army. Let me go over here. And so that is another place where Rosser comes up. He's around during the Appomattox campaign. And he captures a Union general, John Irvin Gregg, and rescues a wagon train near Farmville. He led a daring early morning charge at Appomattox Courthouse on April 9th, 1865, which is also the day of the surrender, and escaped with his command as Lee surrendered the bulk of the Army of Northern Virginia. But his activities continue after that, too. So post-Civil War, he's going to be superintendent of the National Express Company, and he later would be chief engineer of the Northern Pacific and Canadian Pacific Railway. So he is one of the Confederates that goes to Canada after the Civil War. He ends up getting fired from Canadian Pacific, though, for corruption. He uses his position to amass on the side a fortune of more than $130,000 through speculation and other questionable means. I did not find out what the other questionable means were that he did this with. It is believed he also altered the preliminary survey of the line in Saskatchewan to bring it through Regina, where he had money invested. So this guy's not like he's corrupt.
Well, he certainly is.
And he also worked to have Confederate monuments built, despite General Lee discouraging him from doing so. So Lee is one of the ones that said to him, like, dude, probably not a good idea. When Custer was defeated and killed at the Battle of Little Bighorn, Rosser wrote an article in the Chicago Tribune placing the blame on Custer's subordinates. And he later retracted this statement when a lawsuit was threatened against him for this. In 1886, he buys a plantation near Charlottesville, Virginia, and he will return to the military briefly in 1898 when he was appointed Brigadier General of Volunteers during the Spanish-American War. And he's actually going to train young cavalry recruits at a camp near Chickamauga Battlefield. And he was discharged on October 31st, 1898. He dies in Charlottesville and is buried at Riverview Cemetery there. He's described as a man driven by desire for financial gain and a person who could be, and I quote, arrogant, aggressive, racist, and proud to a fault. That is how he's described. Another interesting thing I found out about Rosser is there is a Rosser Avenue in Brandon, Manitoba. So if you find yourself in Brandon, Manitoba, you can go see.
If you are, I'm sorry.
Yes, I'm sorry if you find yourself in Brandon. Well, we just eliminated all our Brandon, Manitoba listeners. We're going to be getting emails from them. There is a Rosser Avenue. But hey, if you are in the province of Manitoba and find yourself in Brandon, please go take a picture of yourself next to Rosser Avenue and send it to us. Yeah. And he also has a village and rural municipality of Rosser near Winnipeg named after him as well.
I mean, he's a fascinating guy. I mean, don't forget, too, this is a guy who, he commanded the Laurel Brigade. I mean, he built on what Turner Ashby did. He was at East Calvary Field. He protected Lee's left at Antietam.
Yep.
He was literally everywhere. And right up to the end, Five Forks, the whole Shadbake thing.
Yep.
I mean, he was somebody who was always around. He's quoted by pretty much anybody. If you read any of these memoirs, especially the cavalry guys, they all mention him. They all do. And I think he was probably a little bit of a hothead. I think he was probably very eager to do things. I mean, you're growing up in the shadow in this war under people like Jeb Stuart, John Hunt Morgan, John Mosby, all kinds of people. So you want to make your cut. You want to make your situation. And I think when you look at his raid into Beverly, West Virginia, I think he saw this is his chance to put his fingerprint on the history of the Confederacy. Because again, it was desperate times. Desperate times caused with desperate measures. And so you're going to go 75 miles through a snowstorm, because if you pull it off, and he actually pulled it off, you end up being a hero. But he never really got he didn't get the Laurel and Hardy handshake that he thought he was going to get.
No.
And it just didn't turn out that way, because I think at that point it was a little bit too late.
Yeah.
But again, this raid just goes to show what an absolute baller move it was that he did it.
But I think you're right, though, in that this is kind of the Confederacy is getting desperate, especially, because of Sherman's march and all the destruction that has happened on the railways in that area, that they can't get supplies out as quickly, if at all. And now it's going to be happening in the Carolinas. So there's going to be more railways ripped up by him. But that is all part of Sherman's grand plan with doing the March to the Sea and the Carolinas campaign, is to cut off supplies from the Confederates.
Well,
that's how they do it. And that's why they don't, kind of digressing here, but that's why they don't destroy, any of the arsenals in Georgia, because what's the point? You're already taking out the railway. Right. So they can't get supplies there. But and I agree with you. Definitely, Rosser's doing this out of desperate. It's a desperate thing at this point.
He definitely is. He definitely is. But it's a fascinating study because it gives you a little bit of a look inside the mindset of being in winter camp. We haven't really done an episode on life in winter camp, and this is the closest we've come to it. But again, they're going to parties, they're living their lives the best they can. I mean, it wasn't quite like the Confederates in Fredericksburg, in Frederick in 1862, living the life, and
Well, they had snowball fights in the winter of 1864.
Right, but this was still tough living. But he pulled it off, and he pulled it off. He got "You are fired," and it ended up being a situation where he did get the supplies, so the consternation of his men. So what's coming up for us, Mary? What's next?
So next we are going to be doing an episode on Luigi Sagnola. Am I getting there? Sagnola.
You got
Finally,
it.
we said in an episode that we did about Aldi and Middleburg that we were going to talk about him in that episode, and we never did. So we hope our conciliary is happy about that.
Well, he better. But for the record, we didn't say we were going to do an episode. We said we're going to talk more about him later.
Or,
we talked about in the Battle of Aldi,
yeah.
which I don't. You know what? Whatever. Just a freaking joke.
And then at some point we are also going to be late winter, early spring. We are going to be revisiting the Battle of Shiloh. Yes, we did two-part episode about the Battle of Shiloh way back when we first started this. But we're going to revisit it again and probably do like another two-parter about Shiloh. We're also going to be talking about the Lincoln assassination as we get closer to the anniversary date for that as well.
I talked to Dave Taylor today, as a matter of fact. So good things are coming. We're going to be talking. That'll be at the end of February. We decide. I'll talk to Martha later, but we'll figure that out. All right. So we're going to jump off and we'll go from there. Any final words from you there, Mary?
Happy New Year to all of our listeners. We thank you for your support as we are into the 6th year of our podcast
it would be
now. Thank you, Darren, for bringing it like you always do.
I'm just part of the team, Mary. Happy to be here.
Let me guess, the pleasure's always mine.
The pleasure's always yours. Just like Drake May, Mary. I'm just happy to be part of the team. Anyway, everybody, we appreciate you listening. Have a great, safe weekend. It's going to be cold. It's going to be miserable this weekend, so stay warm. Stay imbibed. Grab some of that whiskey from the Camp Beverly if you get a chance to do that, just such as the Confederates did. And we will see you all on the other side.
See y'all later.
Peace out.
Bye.